of heading, but says to the chief musician Maskil, a psalm of David, when Doeg the Edomite came and told Saul and said unto him, David is come to the house of Ahimelech. So let's begin reading in verse 1. It says, Why boastest thou thyself in mischief, O mighty man? The goodness of God endureth continually. Thy tongue deviseth mischief like a sharp razor, working deceitfully. Thou lovest evil more than good, and lying rather than to speak righteousness. And that Selah is sort of a way of writing the kind of like a musical rest. It's a word that simply means to pause, rest, meditate, think on what you've read prior to moving on. And so, thou lovest all devouring words, O thou deceitful tongue. God shall likewise destroy thee forever. He shall take thee away and pluck thee out of thy dwelling place and root thee out of the land of the living. The righteous also shall see and fear and shall laugh at him. Lo, this is the man that made not God his strength, but trusted in the abundance of his riches and strengthened himself in his wickedness. But I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the mercy of God forever and ever. I will praise thee forever because thou hast done it, and I will wait on thy name, for it is good before thy saints. And so kind of the theme here in this psalm is basically that all have sinned. And because of sin, no person can find God on his own. Only God can save us. And David is the personal author here, of course, through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So let's talk about this. I think there's a really good practice. That for one, we're all sinners. The only way out of it is through the grace of God. But this Doeg, let's go over. We're going to turn over to 1 Samuel, and we're going to do a little reading here in chapter 21 and also in chapter 22, and we're going to read about Doeg the Edomite. Now, the psalm was written first and foremost about Doeg the Edomite, who had betrayed Ahimelech and David and then killed God's priest. And we're going to read that in just a moment. And so if you'll find your place in 1 Samuel chapter 21 and verse 7. 1 Samuel 21. Now, this was during a time, if you remember, that King Saul was trying to kill David, okay? You remember David was, he first came in as a harp player or one that played the instrument to try to appease and calm and soothe the king. He had gone mad, he was crazy, and he couldn't function without having some soothing music. Would seem to calm him of his craziness, and of course there's where David came in. But then David had slain the giant Goliath and so forth. Saul was very jealous and envious of David. The people really seemed to love David and praised him. And of course, this made Saul very jealous, and I think even to a point he was afraid he was going to lose his throne was being threatened, and there was a concern about this. So he tried to kill David a few different times, and so David, he basically is on the run from him. And so 1 Samuel chapter 21, let's go ahead and we'll just start reading in verse 1. Then came David to Nob to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, Let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee, and I have appointed my servants to such a place as to such and such a place. Now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or what there is present. And the priest answered David and said, There is no common bread under mine hand, but there is hallowed bread, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women? And David answered the priest and said unto him, Of a truth, women have been kept from us of these 3 days, since I came out, and the vessel of the young men are holy, and the bread is in a manner common, yea, though it were sanctified this day in the vessel. So the priest gave him hallowed bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread. You remember the table of showbread when you walked into the first chamber of the tabernacle. There you would have one of the pieces of furniture was the table, and it would have the 12 loaves on it. That was the table of showbread, representing the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. And so that's what it's talking about, the hallowed bread, the bread that is set aside, set apart for this specific purpose, and that was the showbread that was taken from before the Lord to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. Now, verse 7, Now a certain man of the servants of Saul, this is King Saul, was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. And David said to Ahimelech, And is there not here under thine hand spear or sword? For I have neither brought my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. So he says, I didn't bring any weapon. I didn't bring anything with me because I was in a hurry, because when the king says go, you go. All right? And so here he is. And the priest said, The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom thou slewest in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If thou wilt take that, take it, for there is no other save that here. So the only weapon, the only sword that is there is the one that he took from Goliath, the giant, the Philistine giant. And here it is coming back full circle, if you would. It's wrapped up in the cloth there, and that's the only one that's available. And David said, There's none like that. Give it to me. And so David arose and fled that day for fear of Saul, and went to Achish, the king of Gath. And the servants of Achish said unto him, Is not this David the king of the land? And did they not sing one to another of him in dances, saying, Saul hath slain his thousands, David has killed his 10,000s? And this was part of what created that hatred, that jealousy, the envy that Saul had for David, because the people praised him, and because David had slain, killed the giant. This was a big thing, and so, big deal. And so they say, well, Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed tens of thousands. And David laid up these words in his heart, and he was afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. And he changed his behavior before them, and feigned himself mad in their hands, and scrabbled on the doors of the gate, and let his spittle fall down upon his beard. And so he was acting like he was mad, that he was a lunatic, a crazy guy. Then said Achish unto his servants, Lo, ye see the man is mad. Wherefore then have ye brought him to me? Have I need of mad men, that ye have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? All right. Now, we're going to go on into chapter 22. I know we're doing a lot of reading here, but, we're kind of getting to it. Just stay with it. All right, chapter 22, verse 1. David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down hither to him. And everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them, and there with him were about 400 men. So he created this little following, this kind of like the Bad News Bears here, this little group of individuals, but they were the underdogs. They obviously had various problems and situations. Now, when the world looked at this little group of 400, this was nobody. This was a nothing. All right. But even though David was the one in charge here, and it's amazing to see what God can do. God doesn't. He uses the unlikely many times, and that which doesn't seem to The underdog, so to speak, many times in life. That's how he operates to magnify his glory. And David went thence to Mizpah of Moab. But it's pretty amazing, really, to stop and think about that he had a following, this 400 men, just men in this. And so it's really pretty astonishing account. All right, verse 3, and David went thence to Mizpah of Moab, and he said unto the king of Moab, Let my father and my mother, I pray thee, come forth and be with you till I know what God will do for me. And he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the while that David was in the hold. And the prophet Gad said unto David, Abide not in the hold, depart and get thee into the land of Judah. So, here's what David did. He departed, came into the forest of Harath. When Saul heard, now this is King Saul, remember, King Saul, he's still the king. When Saul heard that David was discovered, and the men that were with him, now Saul abode in Gibeah under a tree in Ramah, having his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. Then Saul said unto his servants that stood about him, Hear now, ye Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds? That all of you have conspired against me, and there is none that showeth me that my son hath made a league with the son of Jesse. Now, who was the son of Saul that he's talking about? Solomon. Yeah, in other words, Solomon, my son, in cahoots. Solomon and they were friends. They were good. They were a friend, and so Solomon came after him. And Jonathan. I'm sorry. I had in my mind, I knew when I said that, I was like, whoa, wait a minute, that's not what I meant. So you have Solomon became king later on, but Jonathan, wow, I don't know where, anyway, sorry. All right, everybody with me? Okay, here we go. Jonathan and David, they were real good friends, real close friends. So, at least I caught it when I misspoke there, but anyhow. All right, so the prophet Gad said unto David, Abide not in the hold. And of course he went on, Depart and get thee into the land of Judah. So David did. And when Saul heard that David was discovered, and the men that were with him, now Saul abode in Gibeah under a tree in Ramah, having his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. Then Saul said unto his servants that stood about him, Hear ye Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all captains of thousands, captains of hundreds, that all of you have conspired against me? So he felt like everybody was going to turn against him, okay, essentially. Does everybody see that? Captains of hundreds, that all of you have conspired against me. There is none that showeth me that my son hath made a league with the son of Jesse. All right, so Jonathan and David. And there is none of you that is sorry for me, or showeth unto me that my son hath stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait as at this day. So, Saul, he was very, what do you call it when you're looking over your shoulder all the time? Paranoid, very paranoid. I think that was the word I was looking for. Very paranoid. He was worried. He thought that David was surely going to kill him. And, what's interesting is while he's making accusation that David wants to kill him, he's the very one that's trying to do what he's accusing David of. Doesn't that sound like a liberal today? Whatever they say you're trying to do, you just watch. That's who they are, all right? So Saul, he was the one trying to kill David. David respected, as we'll see later on, David certainly respected King Saul. So verse 11, and the king, or verse 9, I'm sorry, then answered Doeg the Edomite, which was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob. Now, who is the son of Jesse? That's David, to Ahimelech the son of Ahitub, and he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him victuals, food, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. All right, so David has food, he's got strength, and he has a sword. Not just any sword, but you talk about a kind of a gut punch to King Saul. Just hearing these words, think about it. he doesn't have any sword. He's got the sword of the giant that he slew, by the way. All right? And verse 11, then the king sent to call Ahimelech the priest. Now this is King Saul, sent to call Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests that were in Nob, and they came, all of them, to the king. And Saul said, hear now, thou son of Ahitub. And he answered, here I am, my lord. And Saul said unto him, why have ye conspired against me, thou and the son of Jesse? And that thou hast given him bread and a sword, and hast inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me to lie in wait as at this day. So Saul, he thought that this priest was in cahoots with David. And so here he is, you've given him nourishment, you've given him a sword, and so you're conniving with him. And so Ahimelech, he answered the king, and he said, and who is so faithful among all thy servants as David? David is a servant. He is an honest young man. He's a man of integrity. He is faithful, and by the way, he is the king's son-in-law. All right? And goeth at thy bidding, and is honorable in thy house. This man, he's not just trying to save his own neck and not just bragging on himself. He says, Saul, you know David better than that. You know his integrity. You know his heart. If you would stop and listen to yourself, you're talking crazy. Did I then begin to inquire of God for him? Be it far from me. Let not the king impute anything unto his servant, nor to all the house of my father, for thy servant knew nothing of all this, less or more. Nothing at all. That was not the intent. That was not, I'm not trying to, he says, I just simply was, I think Ahimelech was very sincere, and I think he's truly in this position, in this place. He is trying to say, he says, David is a good man. As God said, he's a man after my own heart, okay? And this was known. He says, I can't believe you would accuse him and accuse me. So the king said, thou shalt surely die, Ahimelech. Why does he want to kill him? Because he's given a sword and food to David, who the king hated, and all at this moment. His hatred kind of came and went, and kind of went down to the envy and jealousy and so forth. Thou and all thy father's house. And the king said unto the footmen that stood about him, turn and slay the priest of the Lord. So here the Ahimelech, what did he do wrong? All he did was supply food and protection to David. That's all he did in this situation. I'm not saying he didn't do any wrong at any point in his life. I'm talking about in this situation, that's what he did. He simply helped David out. And so now King Saul is telling his footmen, his soldiers there, to kill the priest. Turn and slay the priest. And I want you to notice what he says in verse 17. Not only does he say, turn and slay the priest, but you read on, it says, turn and slay the priest of the Lord. We're not talking about false priests. We're talking about priest of Yahweh, Jehovah. And he knew it. He knew it when he said it. And here's he says, because their hand is with David. Kill them all. Kill these priests because they are protecting, they are with David, and because they knew when he fled and did not show it to me. But the servants of the king would not put forth their hand to fall upon the priests of the Lord. They wasn't going to do what the king told them to do. They knew it wasn't right. They knew in their heart of hearts, they said, no, we're not going to do this. And of course, this was putting their own life on the line whenever they stood against the king, but they did, and I think they did right. Because what we see here is Doeg did wrong, and the Bible addresses it. So the contrast of that is these other footmen, they made the right choice. Doeg did not. Okay, so let's read it. All right, verse 18. And the king said to Doeg, turn thou. By the way, he was a descendant of the Edomite, Doeg the Edomite, which is a descendant of Esau. Okay, Jacob, the twin brother of Jacob. I know this is a lot, but anyways, y'all remember Jacob and Esau, they were twins. And so Doeg is a descendant of Esau. Turn thou and fall upon the priest And Doeg the Edomite turned, and he fell upon the priest and slew on that day 85 persons, a score being 20. So 4 times 20 is 80 plus 5, 85. 85 persons that did wear a linen ephod. So he killed 85 priests that day. And Nob, the city of the priests, smote he with the edge of the sword both men and women, children and suckling. So this is like, in other words, a little baby, and oxen and asses and sheep with the edge of the sword. And one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. So Ahimelech, his son Ahitub, or of Ahitub, named Athar, he made his, however all this happened, I don't know, we can just kind of begin to imagine, but this particular young man, he made his escape, he got away from there, and he made his way to David. And Abiathar showed David that told him that Saul had slain the Lord's priest. And David said unto Abiathar, I knew it that day when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons of thy father's house. And of course, David, he's beginning to, I think you can see that he feels bad in this situation because he's the one that went to the place there to where the sword was at and all of this. So if he hadn't come through there, then Ahimelech would still be alive in his mind. Abide thou with me, fear not, for he that seeketh my life seeketh thy life, but with me thou shalt be in safeguard. So the same King Saul that's trying to kill me is the same King Saul that's trying to kill you. So just let's stick together here. Stay with me, and I'll take care of you. All right? So let's go back now that we read all of that. I know that was a lot, but Psalm 52. So why boasteth thou thyself in mischief, O mighty man? The goodness of God endureth continually. And so this is, as I said, a psalm written about the Doeg, the Edomite, who had betrayed Ahimelech and David. He killed God's priest. And Doeg, he thought he was a great warrior. Doeg even boasted about his deeds, but in reality, his deed was evil, an offense to God. And sometimes, here's the point, in the whole heart of the message, where we at on time? All right, we're going to finish up right here. All of this we've read is interesting. You can go back, you can read it, you can think on these things. But here's what I want to leave you with today. It is easy sometimes to confuse accomplishment with goodness. Just because something is done well or thoroughly doesn't mean it is good or right. It's kind of like this. Someone may be a great gambler. That don't make it right. Someone may be a skillful liar. That don't make lying good. Someone may be a very strong at, he's a very skillful thief. Well, that don't mean that he's good just because he's doing good. So measure all you do by the rule of God's word, not how proficiently you do it. There's people that are very good at lying. That's kind of like what do you call it? Like a bittersweet or a oxymoron. Thank you. All right. I know I could count on my English teacher there, but like an oxymoron, they are good at what they do doesn't make it right. And so because sometimes you say, well, how does this affect us? Well, sometimes as God's people, if we're not careful, we can consume our lives, fill our life with things that are really not valuable. We might, there are things that are good, but may not be the best, so to speak. And so not only measure all you do by the rule of God's word, not how proficiently you do it. Just because you're good at something doesn't mean that it's of the will of God. Does that make sense? Make sure what you're doing is truly in the will of God. Not only being proficient at it, but also the amount, just being productive, just having activity. Activity does not always equate to achievement. Be very careful, and this is something I see that we are really good at, that we really do, is we equate activity with achievement. It's two different things. Activity may be achievement, but it may not be, okay? And so just because we're busy, and let me give you say, well, this is confusing. I don't want to confuse anybody. Please, let me give you an example. Mary and Martha. A great biblical example of exactly what I'm talking about. You see, Doeg thought he was doing a good job, right? I mean, he was very proficient at what he did. He killed 85 priests and then went through town and killed everybody else. We would say, man, he was good at what he did, but it wasn't right. And so just because we're proficient at something, now let's not be proficient as Doeg was. He had blood on his hands, all right? But I'm just simply saying whatever it is in our life, just being proficient or just doing a lot of activity does not necessarily equate to achievement or exaltation of Christ. Martha, you remember I mentioned this. Martha was running around and she was just she was very, very busy. And I think sometimes if we're not careful, we can just we can get so busy to where we can ignore our sin. We can avoid conviction. I think people they fill their life with busyness, busy work, activity. You know, we talk about maybe a teacher gives a student busy work just to get them to the bell, just to give them something to do to keep them out of trouble. Well, sometimes if we're not careful, we can do that ourselves with our own life, just give ourselves busy work just so we don't have to stop and deal with the hard stuff, the conviction, the sin. Martha, she was running around so worried about getting everything, getting the food cooked and making sure that everything was in order and all of this. And Jesus, he scolded her. And Martha even came to Jesus and said, Jesus, Mary's sitting there not doing anything. And the nerve, boy, you talk about one that needs to sit down and be quiet. If there's ever one, she tried to tell Jesus what he ought to do. When in turn, she should have been sitting still, being quiet, and listening to Jesus. Lord help us. And so Jesus rebuked her, and he said, Martha, Martha, Mary is doing that which is good. You see, you and I, we would look at that and we'd say, well, Mary's not doing anything. She needs to get up here and get busy and get to work. Well, maybe we don't need all that activity going on. Just chill out a minute. Settle down. John Wayne used to tell them, all them boys and the cowboys, good old movie, he says, settle down. Just settle down a minute. Let's stop, be still, and listen to the Lord. Try that for a little while. And so, that may seem kind of silly, but I tell you what, to me, it just kind of hit me, and I hope you get a little something from this. I know it's probably not worth a cent and a half coming from me, but I hope you'll take it, study it for yourself, and get something from it. Doeg, he killed all these people, but it wasn't right. Didn't make it right. It wasn't in the will of God. It wasn't what the Lord wanted. And so Doeg thought he was a great warrior, boasting about his deed. How many people running around, look at what I've done, look at what I've done. Man, how about you do something for the Lord, not just the praise of man? And so here Doeg, he's running around bragging on himself, so braggadocious. Look at what I did. In reality, his deed was evil. It was offensive to God. It is easy sometimes to confuse accomplishments, okay? What we call success may not be, what we call success is not always what God defines as success, okay? All right, and then I'm almost done, just another hour and a half, and I'll be done. Verse 8, but I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the mercy of God forever and ever. What is this all about? Well, David is writing, the author here being David, to my understanding from what I see. All right, so David is contrasting God's eternal protection of his faithful servant with the sudden destruction of the wicked. With the Lord by his side, David compares himself to an olive tree. Why an olive tree? Well, not just any olive tree, but one that's flourishing in the house of God. Not only does a flourishing olive tree live for hundreds of years, but it also produces both food for sustenance and olive oil for cooking, light, and dozens of other uses. It represents great productivity and usefulness. This should be our prayer for ourselves. So if we're going to let's fill our life with that which is productive, truly in the eyes of God, like the green olive tree in the house of God. You cannot avoid. How many things do we do in our life that interfere with our walk with God? It doesn't mean we're not busy. There's a lot of people in this world that are very, very busy that are not truly in fellowship with the Lord. And so be as that which is truly beneficial and productive as the olive tree in the house of the Lord that David described himself in verse 8. Okay, I'm going to quit. I'll just stop there. No need in rambling on. So y'all can take that and you can read it again. Probably get some more thoughts. So let's all stand and we'll be dismissed. Thank you for your attention. I hope you have a wonderful